Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at Office Hours Talk Global. Our first hour is general discussion about virtual and media production. Our second hour is usually something we spend a little more time on. Today, we're going to talk about crafty. And the crafty is craft services, what we eat when we're in production. I know it seems like an odd thing to put into a technical production, but it's important, and I think that it's worth talking about if you're doing events. So we'll talk about that in the second hour. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. And our reader today is Mitchell Hill. Mitchell.
Thank you, Alex. First question from Dave Burke in Alexandria, Virginia. Years ago, I worked with sound engineers on radio spots, and they would carefully remove any breath sounds from a voiceover. Today, my Mac's computer voice takes an audible breath before speaking. What's the modern practice for handling breath sound?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It certainly back in the day, we took it out in radio spots, particularly because we had to cut out every tiny little pause, and the breath was usually a pause point. If Apple is emulating that with doing breath sounds in their voices, I don't think any self-respecting audio engineer would allow unusual or deep breaths or anything that changes the cadence or tempo of the read. So it still is a normal practice to cut them out. I don't know why they're adding them in the AI-generated voices.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I imagine they're adding them in the AI to make it sound more like a real person, because normal people don't talk like radio people in a 30-second spot with 40 seconds of copy, where they cut out all the breaths in order to make the time and even speed it up 3%. So I think Apple is doing that simply to make it sound like a human being.
Yeah, and also I think that it's often a cue to that it's about to say something. So it's a cue like, here comes the information that's there. I'd be interested to see if they do it a lot in the middle, but I think that at the beginning it may be just that they've decided to add it as a cue to tell you that it's coming. What's interesting is that it doesn't get taken out of a lot of long form audio. So if you listen to NPR, it's actually something that I hear. Sometimes I have to, this is the red pill, just listen for someone breathing in on NPR and you won't be able to stop hearing it. You won't be able to unhear because they're using, again, like a large diaphragm like I'm using. And because of that, that tends to pick up those breaths pretty effectively. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jacob Goodnight from Indianapolis, Indiana, interested in recommendations for an affordable hair light. Does it need to have barn doors to prevent light spill into the camera?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't have a recommendation, but I was going to mention the fact that it probably doesn't need barn doors if you have a lens shade on your camera, because usually it's up high. If it's up high enough, it won't be a flare problem into your camera unless you're, unless you've got it down into the shot itself. And there are lots of, I'm sure Alex or Mitchell can come up with some of the lower priced little battery powered LED lights that can work great for a hair light in the back and are lightweight.
Yeah, I use this Nanlite 68 or whatever that works well. I don't have any barn doors on it, and it just is above me. If you have it up, I have mine as a large source over my head, and I find it to be more subtle. It doesn't look as much as it's being worked, So I don't like little ones. I like really large ones over top, and we kind of learned to do that in shoots, and so we've kind of gone to there. So, and now we are going to go to the next question.
Next question from Scott Wasserman in Detroit, Michigan. He says, internet bonding exists for standard live stream protocols, but that doesn't work with Zoom. How can I ensure internet reliability when broadcasting to a Zoom webinar? The event is not interactive, so solutions that involve adding delay is okay.
Yeah, so what you want to do is bond the stream from wherever you are and get it to a place that is connected via Ethernet. So, and then have that plumb back into Zoom. So you have like for instance, if you're bonding here, if you're using SRT or using a live view or whatever, you want that to show up somewhere that you have a hard line. And then you can simply make that a video source into Zoom, and then you should have a solid connection into a Zoom webinar. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, many venues that have transitioned to fully cashless operation have deployed cash-to-card kiosks that convert cash into prepaid debit cards on site. Wouldn't most banks, at least in the U.S., issue debit cards even without a line of credit?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, most of them do. So I spent some time in the fintech industry, and I think you have to separate out banks from credit unions and other financial institutions. And most of the banks do offer debit cards. Most of the credit unions do as well. What you discover is that most of the smaller companies use a service like Visa or MasterCard or something that they, or one of the other providers for their credit cards. But actually, one of their few sources of revenue left is charges on debit card usage. And so most banks and small credit unions will actually try and control that themselves because it's a source of revenue. But really, they mostly offer that limited directly, like a check would be to your account.
You go, Rupert.
And it is true that in different regions, that around the world, that the terminology might be used slightly differently. What is referred to as a debit card, in one region may mean something different in another. A lot of the entertainment venues are using that. They'll take your money through a kiosk, either through cash or a card, and convert it into maybe what's called a debit card, but in reality, what is probably more like just an on-site gift card, and that doesn't get processed through the wider debit card or credit card system. It's just a local account with that merchant. An example would just be one of these. You put in you put your money in, and it just gives you a card which is just useful for that particular brand or organization.
Go ahead, Courtney.
This came about primarily because of COVID. They didn't want people exchanging cash, the employees handling cash from a large number of people. So they put up a kiosk so that you give your cash to the machine, and it encodes it onto a card, which isn't tied to an account, not account tied to your name. And this happens because there's a lot of workers in this country that operate strictly on cash. They do not have bank accounts at all, or credit card accounts. If you don't have a bank account, you can't have a debit card. So what this does is it just ties the amount of cash that you fed into the machine to a local encoded number on the card. And if you lose that card, you've lost your money because it doesn't really exist in an account. It's tied to that card specifically, and the machine and the banking system that issues that card keeps track of that card number and the amount of cash left on it. So it's like a gift card, like Rupert said.
And I think a lot of this is also to get around some laws that say that you have to be able to accept cash, and so they don't want to accept cash anymore, and so they put these kiosks up so that they can get around it. So they say, well, you can use cash, you just have to convert it to plastic before we actually interact with it. Next question.
It's a question for me. Warner Media has announced that it is shuttering their new CNN Plus streaming service almost as soon as it was released. How does this affect the future of other streaming services?
Go ahead, Nigel.
What I thought was interesting about the CNN Plus announcement was it struck me that most people who probably watched CNN as a basic service got it on basic cable or as part of their cable package. And therefore, I couldn't understand why they would pay for another service unless it was really differentiated, which it really wasn't. And I don't believe that there was enough of a market for people who wanted a CNN service that didn't have basic cable. And I think they just got ahead of themselves. I don't know this means anything for the broader market, except you need to do a bit better job segmenting your market and understanding if there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, go ahead, Kenneth.
And it might have been just an effort to explore the market to see if there was enough clientele out there to make it worth doing. I don't think it was viable at all, but there's double handfuls of news providers these days. You can take any one you want.
Yeah, it sounded like here's the odd thing about it is it sounded like they definitely had a long-term plan. This is with millions and millions and millions of dollars of development to build this out, and they were tracking with exactly the growth that they expected. So they were hitting that, and then they killed it. Go ahead, Mitchell. Can't hear you, Mitchell.
I think everything got derailed when they announced their merger with Discovery Networks, and I think that the management within Discovery caused that to be shut down. But overall, I think the significant thing that's going to end up happening here is that all these brands are adding plus to their name, whether it's Disney or HBO or anybody. If you don't have a plus next to your name, you're not a streamer. So apparently that's the streaming word to be used. But the problem is that they're trading on their brand, not on their product. And I don't really like that because I think the average family only has so much money to go around. They can only spend $5 on so many different services, and they don't. So what I think is smart is Apple having on Apple TV, they aggregate all these different services, as you can see on here. So I don't have to go searching out Paramount Plus and Showtime.
But you're still paying for that separately, though. I mean, if you go to the Paramount one, I mean, I think
true, but it's easier.
I mean, I think that our path back to cable is that companies like Apple will just aggregate it, and you'll pay one subscription to them, and then they'll dole it out to them, and we're right back to cable networks. Go ahead, Rupert.
The Wikipedia page for CNN Plus does suggest that the decision to close the service came at the same time as some leadership changes. So you just interpret that whatever way you want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think they realize the problem with news is it goes stale almost instantly. And you can't really recycle the news programs over and over again like you can with the entertainment channels that are doing their streaming plus stuff. And so unless they're producing a lot of timeless programming, in other words, public interest stuff that doesn't really have an expire by date, they'd have trouble filling up or making enough data there that you'd be willing to pay extra for, other than the news, which almost everybody gets for free on their cable or other streaming sources. And
it does sound like, as Rupert was pointing to, is that Discovery kind of took over, and they had a much different vision of how this was going to work, and they didn't want a lot of little brands. They want one big brand that has one that you're subscribed to and get all the content from them, which is a better value for the user. And if they can do $9.99 and have everything that Discovery Warner has under it, they have a much better chance of being successful than splitting it up into a bunch of little ones. The other problem that I think that they had is CNN Plus was a horrible idea. And the reason it was a horrible idea is they were taking video away from us. So if you click on stuff and it says, oh, watch the video, that used to be free. And they took that and said, oh, now you have to join CNN Plus to do it. If you're going to create a service, that service has to be something that's new and different. You can't start taking things away that people have had for free for a decade and expect them to be happy about it. It was going to damage their entire, even people like me who I kind of use CNN as kind of like, oh, I'll just jump in and see what's going on. I was about to stop. I was so frustrated with CNN Plus that I was about to stop going to the site after, 20 years of going to the site. So I think that it was a very poorly thought out idea. And so I think that someone at Discovery had the sense to kill it before it got too deep. Next question.
From Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Is there a way to mark various positions in a Resolve project with a tag where a talent speaks about a certain topic? We have about 30 one-hour interviews and want to create outtakes where the talents speak about a certain topic.
You can mark it and then name it. That would be the easiest way to do that, is to mark, to drop markers in the timeline as you go, and then you can actually color those markers as well. So you could just have them all be that way, and then go down through that. I think that's the only way I can think of tagging them specifically to make that happen. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, maybe you could run the dialogue tracks through closed captioning, and so it would create a database of all the words in the scripts, and then you could just search the database for those positions, and I think it will tie those to the time code and the timeline where those words appear.
Yeah, I think it would probably, if it's 31 hour interviews. Yeah, that would. You have to have somebody go through. This is what assistant editors are for. So that's why you send someone through to tag everything to put that in. It actually, for that much data, this is a place that Final Cut does really well, because it has an enormous amount of database driven things where you still have to have someone go through and do it. But once you have it set up, I don't think there's going to be an effective way to do it. You could do it through what Courtney said, which is to definitely send it to something like Simon Says. It'll give you back something that you can put into all of those relatively effectively. And then, because it'll just be automatic transcript and you drop it back in. But I think that you may find that searching for it and finding it and then trying to figure out where it actually started and everything else will take longer than having someone watch and mark it on the way through. So it is someone's, week or two to do that, or 2 weeks probably to do that. But I think that'd probably be more effective. Next question.
Dave Burke from Alexandria, Virginia. I'm starting to volunteer with Librivox as an audiobook narrator. Any advice on choosing the right pace, and maintaining it over time?
I didn't even know that Librivox was a thing. Like I looked at this earlier in the morning when we were going through the questions, and I thought, oh, this is amazing. So what it is you can volunteer to read books. They have volunteers. Now, I listened to some of them, and some of them, people have never done this before. But I was thinking, as practice, it'd be fun to do chapters, because you don't also have to commit to a whole book. You can actually just commit to a chapter. I'm going to read it, and I've often thought about doing audiobooks, and I was like, oh, this might be a good way for me to fiddle with that. As far as the pace and maintaining it over time, I think that I actually don't try to keep a specific pace as much as trying to stay interested. Like if I'm reading something to someone or my kids or people, and I've read books for people, small books, I go with the pace of the story, so I'm speeding up, I'm slowing down. I'm trying not to talk like a Pittsburgher, which can be very fast. So I try to slow down a little bit, but mostly it is the monotonous pace of trying to keep it exactly the same is actually, it's harder to listen to. So I think that a lot of times you can, speed up a little bit and be more interested in certain things and accentuate certain things as you move forward. So I'm very excited about to see how you do on that, because let us know, because it's an interesting project. It is all books that are more than 95 years old, which means that they were created before the mouse. That's usually that's like our copyright laws are driven by one thing, and that is the Mickey Mouse. So everything before that is open source at this part, is copyright free, and everything after the mouse is copyrighted. So we'll see if that continues as the storms arrive. Next question.
Eric Price from Kansas City, USA. Any particular things to take into consideration when filming a panel at a local Comicon, given the dark room and bright lights?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, given the dark room and the bright lights, get you a matte box for your camera with an eyebrow, which is a piece of basically like a barn door on a light, which is, you can tilt it down to make sure that the lights that are just out of frame and frame the backlights or any Vera lights or any other, entertainment type lighting that they have around them are framed out. And then you can adjust for the exposure of their faces without and having the bright lights totally make everyone else increase the contrast to the point that you can't see anyone.
Yeah, the other thing you want to look at is shooting in log. Using a camera that'll shoot in log, because it'll get a lot more dynamic range. You can then make that adjustment later. You can make that adjustment later as far as where you put the light. When you shoot in 709 in regular video, you have very little dynamic range. And so you have to make a lot of choices on site, which are not perfect. And so a lot of times you can do finer control later. If you shoot it in some kind of log format. If you're streaming it, you're stuck with what you got. But otherwise, I would take a look at that. Next question.
From Jeff Vreeland from Indianapolis. If I were attaching lights to my desk as opposed to having them on the floor, how high up do they need to be to properly light me on Zoom?
Mitchell?
And in my case, I have it up about 4 feet, and it's up to my left. And a reason for that is the reason of the height is if you look at my glasses, you don't see a reflection. But if I were to go back like this, you start to see the light panel in there, and that's not appropriate. So you got to get it slightly above your head and shoot some light down on you to keep it from reflecting in things.
Yep, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it depends. If you have glasses, that's the main issue. If for getting it up higher, since it's not in the shot, lower and nearer the lens is actually better. That it makes you look younger, and it fills in the wrinkles and the eye sockets much better if it's lower. If you get it up too high, then you're going to be casting a shadow. The nose is going to be casting a shadow, and your eye sockets are going to go dark. So what I do is I have a panel light that's up at about just about 15 degrees above the camera and off to the right, that's counteracting the sunlight that is smacking me in the side of the face as we hit this time of day. And then I have another little light down low to fill up under the hat and to fill in the eye sockets to help with that. So you might want to make sure you have some lights down low to fill in the shadow.
Yeah, sometimes we do have some. Be careful of the lights down low, because it looks like a horror film pretty quickly if you have too much light coming up. So it's very, very subtle. I usually start with about 30 to 45 degrees up above me, because what I want to do is try to do the best I can to carve out my chin. So for most people, I'm trying to carve the chin out. So I just move up until I do that. Usually I will put the lights as high as I can, while still seeing, when I'm looking into the camera, I'm still seeing some highlights in my eyes. That's usually the thing that I'm trying to get to. Next question.
And the question comes to us from Aaron Giancarelli from Flagstaff, Arizona. My ATEM ISO Extreme is only allowing me to use 3 DV effects at the same time and no more. Is this correct, or do I have an issue with my ATEM?
I actually don't know what the spec is for the ISOs. I'm just trying to look here real quickly. It says it has, because I've never actually tried to use that many. It has 4 upstream keyers. Yeah, it says it has DVE with borders and drop shadow is 2. So somehow you're getting more than it says it has. I was thinking, I don't think it had 4. So I think that it's a limitation of what it has. It's kind of amazing for $1,000. I mean, for us, that you would have those things, but you want to look at the specs there. There are a bunch of different bits and pieces here, but as far as generators, chroma key, it does say it says up to 4, but when it says up to 4, it doesn't mean 4. So
that's only in the super source, I believe.
Yeah. I think that the super source. So I think that's the issue. If you use the super source, you can have all of them. You're right, Courtney. And I think that when it says up to 4, it means that if you have to use the super source to do that. So I think that's what you're looking at. Next question.
Matt Halverson from Brookings, South Dakota. I've had my Aputure Lightdome II for about 3 years now, and 5 of the rods have pulled out from the connection points on the frame. Can I use Loctite to fix this? Any other fixes to suggest?
I mean, you can. It's a permanent. It's Loctite will get it there. Loctite, by the way, doesn't work that well if it's really cold. But in South Dakota, you need to know that Loctite gets brittle at low temperatures. So that's the only thing to kind of think about there. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the construction of those little rods are. If they're fiberglass or carbon fiber. You might use contact cement, which doesn't tend to be brittle in cold weather. You put it, slather a little bit in the hole and a little bit on the rod and let it sit for about 10 minutes and then jam it in there. And that should hold it pretty tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I usually use 2-part cements, that I find that those would be a lot easier to use than Loctite. So I grew up using a lot of Loctite, but I find that, 2 parts that mix together gives you a little bit more time and gives you a little bit more control than Loctite does. Next question.
And it comes to you from me, from Wilmington, Delaware. Today is Earth Day. What are you doing to reduce your carbon footprint?
Rupert?
I am working remotely, not traveling to an office, and not traveling to events like NAB.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I agree with Rupert. I think that makes a lot of sense to work remotely and save the gas. And speaking of cars, I bought a sports car, and I got a 6-cylinder instead of a 8 or a 12-cylinder, and my friends were giving me a hard time about that. But you have to submit where you can, and I think that the whole thing about Earth Day and reducing your carbon footprint is about doing lots of little things, not necessarily one big thing, but lots of little things in every way you can.
Go to Courtney.
Yes, I'm wearing my carbon-based flip-flops, which reduce the amount of footprint that I have made out of carbon.
Next question.
Sorry, I had to react to that. Douglas Carmichael asked the question, the iOS development curriculum I'm working through, CodeWithChris, doesn't cover technologies like Apple Pay. Where would be a well-crafted resource to learn about those more advanced technologies?
I would make sure I covered everything that's in a coding curriculum before I started working on the advanced stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about Apple Pay right now. What I will say is that once you start incorporating things like Apple Pay, you're now dealing with Apple Pay has a lot of taking people's money has a lot of liability. So I get good at building apps just before I got into anything that would do that. But I would, there's a temptation to want to go down some certain vertical, but I would there's a lot of stuff covered in his piece, and I would make sure that I was through most of that before I tried to work on the advanced concepts. Next question.
From Chris
I'm going to say one more thing. I know we're going to jump to, is that the most important thing is to start publishing. Even if no one uses your apps, publish to the App Store. So figure out how to take an app and publish it to the App Store, because what really gets coders is they start building a bunch of stuff. They build bad habits, and then they can't figure out why Apple won't accept their apps. So successfully getting a simple app onto the App Store is super important, because it's important to do it early and do it often, because you want to get through. You want to know how that works. All these complaints that that coders have about getting onto the app store is because they're sloppy. They're either sloppy or they're trying to be creative, and so they're trying to do something that they're not supposed to do, or they're just being sloppy about it. I work on apps that get published all the time, and it takes a little bit of time to get through it and get it worked out, but it's not a big deal. It's just a matter of knowing what the rules are and following them. It's called adulting. All right, next question.
From Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Anyone using Hedge Video? It seems like at first read pretty decent, but I'm always wary of files transfer hooks into an OS.
Earlier on, we had Hedge. They actually came on and talked about it. It looks like a really powerful application. And I realized when you put that up is we're now churning through a lot of data. And I was like, we should probably think about how to use Hedge possibly. So we're going to take a look at that. I'm glad you asked that question. But yeah, there's a whole second hour with the folks from Hedge if you do a search for the older stuff. Next question.
Trevor Harrison from Burnaby, BC, Canada. RIP Mac OS server. Apple officially kills it as of a few hours ago.
I don't know anybody that's been using it for quite some time, so they I don't know if they kill it as much as they just close the door. Go ahead, Courtney.
And also Microsoft has announced the end of SMB is no longer going to be included in any versions of Windows. So they're deprecating that form of free Ethernet protocol that for local area networks.
Next question.
Fred Eric Eckert from Bad Herrenbad, Germany. I'm looking for timecode generators. Set up 3 times Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema Camera 6K and a MixPre 6.2. So far, I found the TENTACLE SYNC E, and they have a link there for it. Any recommendations?
Courtney, haven't you used the Tentacle?
I've seen it. I don't have one. I use the Denicky stuff for years. Their sync boxes and slates, which are always quite good. Tentacle Sync is good. I've looked at them, and they have a Bluetooth version that synchronizes the multiple boxes over Bluetooth, so you don't have to worry about jamming them all day. And they also exchange some metadata, so it looks like a very interesting product, but I don't own any.
Yeah, I know I have. The Tentacle stuff has looked really interesting, and I have, I think that the one that I have been using, and I believe this is the one that Mickey has talked about, is the ambient. I think it's the ambient recording generator, which is a little bit more expensive. So I think that's the one that I've used in the past there. So it's ambient recording. The ACN CL, I believe, is the one that I have somewhere in the office that I've been using for something. So a lot of ours are built like they're bigger clocks that we build into our system. So we don't have a lot of portable ones. But the Tentacle, I think, works pretty well. Denicky also makes them. The other thing to know is that, we definitely, you can jam. I believe you should be able to jam from, I don't know about the MixPre, from the larger recorders, we can jam the camera from the recorder. And you may want to look at your MixPre to see if it does this. But I know that from my Scorpio and the 8 series and the 6 series and many of the other sound devices, you can jam the cameras to the recorder. And so we've definitely done that in the past. So instead of having a separate thing to jam them, you just jam them from and that's actually a nice tight operation. So take a look at the manual on the MixPres and see if it's capable of producing LTC. Next question.
Matt Halverson from Brookings, South Dakota. Last week, the commentator's audio at the Grizz Wolves game went out in the second quarter, and it just sounded like electronic noise. What is the main cause of audio failures in a live environment? Is it usually a cable or some type of interference?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Usually some type of interference or some issue using wireless. The only way to be absolutely certain that you're in good shape is to use a wired connection. And if you insist on using wireless, make sure you test it after the venue has filled up because things can change.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, Mitch stole what I was going to say. Wireless, usually wireless wireless transmitters and receivers transmitters at least are all battery powered, and failure on a long broadcast like that, somebody forgot to change the batteries right before the show started. Then for hits
somewhere, for the remote hits, the wireless would be problematic. I've never seen a game that used wireless for, except for like maybe the belt packs, but usually they have a backup for that. But if there's a commentator with a headset, they're usually tied in via wire for this very reason. I mean, so I've been in the back of a lot of basketball and football and NHL games, and almost all the commentators are wired, specifically because they're really worried that they will break up, and they are the core of that piece. That can be cut wires. It can be a Dante, something happening with Maddie or Dante. So clocking issues can. Clocking issues. Anyway, clocking is an issue with both of those areas. So there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. Audio it just feels like audio. If something's going to go wrong with your production, it's going to be power or audio, and audio is pretty high up there. So it's something you worry about all the time for that process. But it could be wireless. Could be Dante. Could be Maddie. Could be someone cutting a wire. Those are some of the usual suspects. Next question.
Trevor Harrison from Burnaby, BC, Canada. I need to do a telephone call and show without using my telephone, but a web interface that ideally puts out each call in a separate channel. Call-in Studio has this with WebRT, but is pricey and cost a lot per caller. Any other services?
Go ahead, John.
Couldn't you do this all with Zoom and Zoom Phone and bring those in, and then from there you could figure out some way to get that out to single channels, I would think.
Well, I mean, the way we do our Zoom events, it would possibly be it'd possibly be a thing we could do. So you would have you could do Zoom. Because basically we have everyone talking through Zoom, but we're taking ISOs out of each person, and then we're mixing them back together in hardware. So you could have multiple computers that did all of those things. The question is whether you are trying to do it live or whether you're trying to record. If you're trying to do it just for a record, there are plenty of solutions that will do that. There's lots of podcasting records where everyone just jumps on and they'll upload those later. So I guess that's the big question is if you're trying to do it live, what we do is we have them all talk over Zoom, but each person is in their own Zoom room, and then we cross mix all of those and send them back a mix minus so that they can hear themselves. We can talk to them, and then they can also do that part. So that's the way we kind of approach it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael returns to ask, as I work through the CodeWithChris curriculum, what would be an effective way to demonstrate my development skills to potential employers and clients?
Good, Courtney.
Create a functioning app and get it published somewhere, because that's always a good way to do it. That shows that you can write code and develop a program from the ground up to a point that it's even commercially viable. So even if you haven't gotten it published yet, if you can walk in there with, hey, here's an app I built that does this, and show it to them, install it on your computer, have it running on your computer, and show them how it works. That's a good example to show them your skill as a programmer.
Yep, absolutely. Publish. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. I've been using shadow.tech for vmix in the cloud for the last few days with good results so far. What is the best way to stress test a vmix instance?
I would say for most of these, it is putting up a lot of super sources, graphics, playback. You want to push what it's trying to do. So animated, I guess they call them scenes. So you're animating between those things. You're playing out. You have moving video. You have more multiple sources that are all going into those things. I think those are the and then maybe lower thirds. Just trying to push as many things at it as possible. But I think those would be the key things. If you get a proper instance, and I think there's a lot of people on this group that know what those know what you need. vmix should run pretty well in the cloud. There's a lot of people using it. Next question.
And it's also from a Chris, but in this case, Chris Taylor from Carlsbad, California. There are rumors that Apple will be announcing a new M2 chip at WWDC 22 in June for at least 2 Macs. If there is a better chip coming, will that stall sales of the existing M1 lineup?
Go ahead, John.
Yes, this is pure speculation. However, you would think that they would release the Pros at WWDC, possibly with the M2 chip. That way they don't cannibalize the lower end market.
Hey, go ahead, Nigel.
So the answer is there a better chip coming? The answer is always yes, there is always a better chip coming. So there's no question about that. I think the real issue is, do you need that extra chip? Is that extra chip going to give you a level of performance that's going to make a real difference to your application? And I think you have to break your workloads down and look at them in terms of the I/O they're doing and how fast you're going to disk or to, some sort of electronic storage, how much memory you've got, and what processor they've got. And you can probably get more performance out of the Pro and the Ultimate than you will out of a base M2. So there's always a better chip, but the real question is, what workload are you doing?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's good advice. And, here's the thing. If you wait, yeah, you'll probably be okay. But if you have the use of something that can make you money today, buy it. I mean, that makes sense. And the M1 is fine. I mean, the M1 Ultra is over the top. I mean, the specs on it are awesome. So to always worry and be paranoid about, well, the next thing, as Nigel says, there's always going to be something else coming down the road. So get it now if it can help you.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think this is referred to as the Osborne effect. It happened to Adam Osborne when he had the old Osborne computer, and he announced he's got a new one that does even more and better. And they never sold any of the old ones because everyone was waiting for the new one to come out. And then he couldn't, since he didn't sell the old ones, he couldn't raise enough money to make the new one. And so he went out of business. And this is why Apple, of course, for years and years and years, has made everyone involved with new products sign like a 30-page non-disclosure agreement. And they are extremely strict on violations of that agreement. You are not only fired, you are sued for millions of dollars if you release any of that information in advance. And it's to prevent them from diluting the market by, ending up with a warehouse full of the previous version of the computer by people waiting for the new one to come out. That's why they're so secretive, and it's only speculation until they physically announce it on stage.
I think also Apple sometimes lives way in the future compared to a lot of the other companies around them. And so leaking things out of what's possible or what they're working on, drives other companies to, so beyond just the keeping people handle it, Apple oftentimes is way ahead. And sometimes they kill products that they don't, we never see them. I've talked to folks that have worked at Apple, and they've said this is 10 years ago. They said that they saw stuff that would be amazing. They'd buy it in a heartbeat and just never made it to the consumer. They don't feel like they have to build everything that they work on. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, it's a truism that if you wait another 6 months, there'll be a really great computer that you can buy. And the counteraction to that, of course, is opportunity cost. What will you not be able to do now that will make you money because you're waiting for something else? Personally, I'm waiting for an M4 or maybe 5. I don't know.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question is coming to us from Matt Halverson in Brookings, South Dakota. When using the noise reduction option in Audition or Premiere Pro, how much room tone should you record for the software to work best? 10 seconds? 1 minute?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
If you're going to do like a convolution type sample, you could probably get away with like 15 seconds. It doesn't have to be super long. It doesn't have to be as long as the cut is. Just enough that the AI can get smart with that noise and know how to filter it out.
Go ahead, Courtney. I can't hear you.
Keep clicking on that little button and nothing happens. Sorry. It can be pretty short. 10 seconds is probably enough as long as there's no uniquely identifiable noise within that 10 seconds. It has to be an even sound without a repeating. If you did 10 seconds, it can loop it. But if there's any anomaly in there, you should remove that if you can edit it out, or make sure that there's no uniquely identifiable clunks or chunks or noises within that 10 seconds.
Yeah, consistency is more important than time. I've done cleanups where I've had 2 seconds of it because that's the noise that I wanted to grab onto, and it's just going to loop it. But if it has any clicks, dings, things going on and off, anything else. So a lot of times people try to do longer samples, but there's variance in it, and that makes the solution less accurate. Next question.
Matt Halverson from Brookings, South Dakota. Is there ever going to be a time when Moire can be taken out in post-production? In my last interview, the woman wore a shirt that had tight weave and has waves going through it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't think so. I mean, that's pretty complex noise interference, and there's really no AI out there right now that can fix a Moire issue, particularly if it's a bad one.
Go ahead, Courtney.
In the days of standard definition telecine, they did have anti-Moire filters that they could put on. Like working as the screen photographer for Microsoft for years and years, where you're trying to do inserts of screens. This is a big problem because you're inside and you're seeing the pixels, and it applies a high frequency filter to the scene, which basically reduces the focus, blurs the image somewhat to remove it. And so there's no real way. There is a way with AI that can track the area that has noise, AI, that has Moire in it, which shows up as high frequency noise, and it reduces it. It applies a filter to that high frequency, but it just blurs that area and tracks that area and blurs it, and it looks nasty.
Next question.
Another question. Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas asked.
We lost Mitchell there. Rupert McRae asks, a new TV news channel is launching in the UK on Monday, available to free-to-air broadcast, satellite, cable, and streaming. Is broadcast alive and well. So, Rupert, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I just saw it in the news. I guess mentioned it elsewhere, but it's I think it's a spin-off from one of the international news organizations, but they're launching a new channel, what they call a linear channel. So it's a full-time thing, although I think they're going to be syndicating some of the content.
Right.
And it's coming out over the air, just as a regular broadcast channel.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'd be interested to know who's behind it, who's financing it, because these days there are a lot of news channels that are developed for, propaganda purposes or for political slant or for some type of other remuneration, some subversive remuneration other than just providing a free news channel. So I'd be very wary of what it is until I found out who was behind it or what their goal was.
Yeah, and I think that there's still a lot of people out there with bunny ears, and satellite downlink and everything else. And so we have to remember that there's still a viable market. It's why we're looking at it. We're looking at taking this show and putting it up on satellite because we know that there is still people out there that we can reach that don't necessarily have it. And the other thing to think about is don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do it. So they may want to watch things on TV because they don't want to pay for the 1 gig or 2 gig or 3 gig or whatever it's going to take to watch it all the time. So I think it's still a viable thing, and it's not. In the grand scheme of producing content as a TV network, putting it on broadcast and cable is not particularly expensive. It's expensive, but it's not incredibly expensive. There's a lot of services that provide that now, and you can get packaged up without too much cost. So I think that's probably the calculation. If you're going to build a new show, if it was only streaming, you'd probably limit your audience dramatically. And so making it available across all of those. Do we know? I'm sorry, and I think you might have said it, but I was looking at something else. Do we know what the content is?
I think it's a derivative of News International, so it's a lot of
right.
content similar to Fox and things like that. But debate and general commentary. I think
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Are you back, Mitchell?
I think I am.
Okay, great. Next question.
And the next question is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Are you ever shocked by the response to simple one-off replies on social media, either positive or negative?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So the answer is yes, and often. And I try and decide whether I think this is somebody who's struggling with confirmation bias and is looking for something to agree with something they believe. It's somebody who has a political or a technical or a social thing to try and drive and will say whatever fits to that. But mostly what I'm shocked by is people just post without thinking. And if Elon ends up buying Twitter, my advice to him is put a draft capability, because most of those tweets that I find most surprising, I think if people put in draft and came back an hour later, unless they had a particular axe to grind, they probably wouldn't send.
My older daughter, her quote is that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to Twitter. I think that there is a lack of accountability in social media that causes a lot of this. So when you don't use real names, when it's not connected to your social graph, when it's not, even in Facebook, you see a lot of it, but you don't see very much of it in LinkedIn because that's your professional's graph. And you don't see a lot of people taking heavy stances or anything else in LinkedIn. They do occasionally. You always kind of go, ooh, I can't believe they said that. So I think that there is a feeling that people can be a little less, again, they're not accountable for it, and so I think that is an interesting puzzle for social media. I think that there is in general, I think that's a challenge, of accountability. People feel like they can say a lot of things when they're not held accountable for what they say. Next question.
From Eduardo Augustine in Panama. And he has asked, has anyone been able to set up a Telstrator solution like Alex, but with tablet like an iPad or an Android with actual video footage?
Other people can do it where they're just drawing. I haven't seen. The big problem has been drawing over top of video is the problem that we haven't seen. I haven't seen anybody solve with their tablets because the tablets don't have a limited resource to that. It should. The M1 or the new Pro iPad or whatever has all the horsepower to do it. I just don't know if it just doesn't have the hooks to ingest video. Now, the other way that we've thought about doing it is streaming to it. So back in the day, there was this thing called a DxO camera, DxO1, which is a little camera that would put lightning onto a phone. And it would go into your lightning on your phone, and it would give you a 1-inch sensor with 20 megapixels for your, and it's a great camera. It's still better images than most of what you get from your phone, from the current iPhone. Problem is that, how do you get it in there? And what they figured out how to do is a very low latency stream, milliseconds into the phone from a hardware. I've never seen anybody else do it. So that's the only time I've ever seen anybody stream through that connector onto the phone. Next question.
And from Douglas Carmichael, I remember an article mentioning a recording of the Notre Dame organ in Paris, and it mentioned the organ was known for its rich bass sound compared to others. How would you record that effectively, and what gives the organ that bass extension?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Very long pipes, because it is a pipe organ, and it generates those bass sounds with, if you've ever torn apart a pipe organ, it comes from air passing through these long tubes. Sometimes they're square and sometimes they're round, but they can be 15 to 20 feet long for the base and large diameter. They can be, 5 to 6 inches in diameter. And that creates your low frequency sounds. And to record them, of course, you just need to have something that records down to 20 to 30 hertz. And you can capture that sound easily.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney. The bigger the pipe, the lower the frequency. They're literally cut to the same wavelength as the sound itself. So if you've got 20 hertz, then you've got a big pipe out there. And I guess theoretically, as long as you're pushing air, it could go to any frequency in the low end as long as it's air.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh. The Discord channels under the topic OHNAB Coverage 2022 are live in the Office Hours Discord. We can vote for the vendor booths to send our field reports to during the show. What do you think will be the most popularly requested channels?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I was just going to turn this on its head a little bit. I mean, hopefully we'll encounter some interesting vendors there and pique some interest. But equally, hopefully some of those interesting vendors will find the office hours interaction interesting also and seek some information in return. So I'd encourage those folks to have a sort of, quick elevator pitch about what office hours is and, how they could interact, back with us in the future on an ongoing basis.
Go ahead, John.
BMD will be the number one voted booth.
Yeah, we're all going to want to see it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, of course, BMD is number one, but I'd also like to see someone go to AJA and Decimator Design, because they always come up with some new little gadgets and boxes to see what they've got up their sleeves.
Yeah, no, I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting ones. I always like a lot of the ones that have the grip stuff, so the lights and the supports, and I'm interested to see some. The new TERADEC announcements look pretty good. They have a new transmitters that look pretty interesting. Obviously, and for those of you listening, BMD is Blackmagic Design, because a lot of us have a lot of their gear. AJA hopefully will have more in the area of HDR and hopefully in a lot of little bits and pieces there. And they often have really filled that out. I think DJI will be there, so we'll hopefully see some new stuff there. So there's a and then by the way, as you go into the weekend and into next week, one of the things that Maxon does, we watched their keynote on Wednesday, but they stream all the sessions from the booth. And so you can really see a lot of really impressive artists come up and talk about how they build things. And you can find that probably on their website. Next question.
Liberty White from Atlanta, Georgia. There's word that the YouTube may be delving into podcasts. What are the pros and cons to this?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Interesting. I mean, many podcasts probably be on YouTube in some way or another already. Not all, of course, but so there will be some overlap. It'll be interesting to see how they, line those out in terms of what is new content and maybe what was there anyway. I just hope that they just do a better job of the subscription kind of model in terms of subscribing to your feeds or your channels, because I don't find that my subscription to YouTube channels is always 100% reliable in giving me the things that I should be expecting to see.
Yeah. I think it's good for podcasts as far as, making it more available to folks. The only hard part is that it starts to fragment the market. You're starting to trying to figure out where you put it. And right now, like a lot of us just kind of put them everywhere and see how they go. But it makes it harder when it's talking about aggregating, keeping track of number of people downloading. And so it'll be what YouTube's really good at that we don't get in a lot of other places is data. Because it's Google. And so, getting a lot of data about your audience is something that a lot of people want, a lot of advertisers want. So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of data that they produce in that area. So I think those are the pros. And again, the cons I think are that it's continually fragmenting where people are seeing it. But in the end, it probably doesn't matter. You want to make sure that you have some central location, a website you can bring people back to, and potentially a community like Discord or something like that. Next question.
Matt Halverson from Brookings, South Dakota. Do you prefer your lights to be 3200K or 5000K for filming interviews?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Unless otherwise specified by a client, I always go for daylight, and that's closer to 5 and 5000K Kelvin, if you prefer. And otherwise, I'm going to dial it back. But if I've got a bicolor light source, like I usually use a light panel, I can dial in anything that makes sense for to capture the event or the environment that you're in, because depending on where you are, you may need to dial it up or dial it back.
Yeah, and as a note, it's 32K or 56K or 50K or whatever you have, but the color would be out of our 3200K would be out of the visual spectrum. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it depends on the environment. If you're in a closed studio that has no windows, then you can go for 32K because it used to be that lighting fixtures were much cheaper with tungsten at 32K, so you could balance it for 4,000 or 32K. But daylight lights were much more expensive because you'd have to use HMI or some type of gas discharge tube or fluorescent to light up to daylight. So it depends on your environment. If there's existing fluorescents which you can't turn off, then you'd go for daylight, probably, because they're probably set closer to daylight than for 32K, unless you replace the tubes. So I'd have both in your quiver there. So you could pull out whatever you need lighting-wise to match your environment. That way you're not mixing color temperatures too much.
Yeah, I have standardized on 56K a long time ago just because it was easier to do all in one. And the biggest problem that I had was dealing with the windows. So I just said, I'm just going to standardize to the windows and then everything else will kind of fit in. I also find that I feel that digital cameras respond to 56K better than 32K. So I feel like they'd actually, I get less grain and stuff like that. So next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Alex, with the new Mac Studio, have you noticed any problems with 4 monitors?
I have not put 4 monitors on my Mac Studio. It's been mostly working in Resolve at the moment, and I've got 2 monitors that are connected, and it works just fine. The only issues that I've had so far is my Mac Studio, and I can't figure out whether it's Mac Studio or Monterey, but my promise RAID will not run. It'll go like 9 gigs of transfer and then it just stops. And so I couldn't figure out playback. I was working on this project, and so I put it into one of my Mac Minis, and that was fine. Like it just ran the way it should, but the Mac Mini wasn't powerful enough to run the footage. So then I had to go back to, which was a 16 gig to the point where I was like, oh, I can do anything with an M1 16 gig Mac Mini. And the answer is no, I can't. If I've got 6 channels of 5.7K raw, Blackmagic raw, it's not going to play back. So, we learned a whole bunch of things there. So anyway, what I will say is taking all that footage and putting it on the internal drive in the studio makes everything plays back really nicely. So it does work there. But as far as monitors go, I haven't figured out. I haven't tried to put 4 in. I'm not sure when I'll have the time to go through a 4 monitor test, but I haven't seen any issue yet. Next question.
And it's from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. In your opinion, what elements make for a good podcast?
Go ahead, John.
I've set up dozens and dozens of people in podcasting. First of all, of course, you have to have good content, but also good production. I think the number one thing in podcasts, my throat's not cooperating, is consistency and persistence. Because remember, it took Joe Rogan at least 8 to 10 years to get any real traction with his podcast.
There you go, Nigel.
Yeah, I would put those in a slightly different order. I think consistency is really important. But when it comes to a podcast, it's the presenter. Do I find them interesting? Do I want to listen to them? I think then it's the content. Is the content good enough to keep coming back? And then it's the production. And the production can be great, but if the presenter is just not there and you don't connect to them, it doesn't matter how good the production is.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I usually run into that same issue, and it is the presenter. Nigel is absolutely correct. And a lot of times if there are early attempts at doing a podcast, they act like they think they're sounding like an announcer or an interviewer, and it's always wrong. And I always tell them, I said, look, that's not the way to do it because that's somebody else you're trying to sound like. Be yourself. Become comfortable with the with the podcast, and once your true personality shows through, you're going to win or lose based on that.
Go ahead, Rupert.
And on the basis that a podcast is likely to be audio first or audio only, I always think it's a good idea to not let your presenters or your speakers refer too much visually without describing it to your listening only audience, because then you're kind of excluding them if they can't see what it is you're talking about.
You go, Courtney.
Yeah, your presenter has to be dynamic, but know when to listen and get out of the way. If they have a guest on, they should ask the question and lead the conversation in a certain direction, but be a good listener and pick up on what their interviewee is saying and respond to that if you're going to respond at all, rather than just going down a list of questions and asking question one and letting the person answer. And then, okay, we're going to go to question two, but not following up on anything that the other person said. So you have to be interested and listen as a presenter, and that makes for a much more interesting podcast.
Yeah, I think that in the end, a podcast is a good radio show. It's just a great radio show that you can download. And I think that you want to listen to a lot of radio shows and think about what you like and what you don't like. It has some advantages that it's not tied to time and space. So it can you can listen to it anywhere. The things that I think about, I've built a bunch of podcasts and been on a bunch of podcasts. The number one is that the audio quality has to be pristine, in my opinion. Like, I just think that it's just really, you're not going to, the thing is, people won't complain. People, oh, no one complains. When anybody says no one complained, I feel like they're not thinking very deeply about it. And this is about anything. Well, no one complained. Well, a lot of people don't complain about things that they don't like. And a lot of people also, sometimes it's not that they notice that it's a complaint. It's that you appear smaller to them. So they're not complaining, but you're not as refined as they expected, or they're not whatever. And I had a client that seemed to be very happy with me, with what I was doing. This is a decade ago, and then picked another agency to do all of their high end work, even though that agency was 3 times more expensive than me. And it was because I didn't give them the refined experience that agency gave them. They felt like there was more gravitas. They felt like they had a better office. They had better quote pages. They had all those other things, and they felt like we're growing now and it's time. And they, just got left behind, by that client to do the things that I've been doing for them for 2 or 3 years. And that was a big lesson for me, for that and no one was complaining and they all seemed happy. But when the push came to shove, they moved on. And users do that, where is this something they just have to listen to? And I think that it's got to be a great conversation about something that people can expect. They got to know when they turn it on, they can expect something. And so a lot of times we get into formats, to get back to what John was talking about, is every week. Like, you have to, like, once you turn it on, it is weekly. That is the do not do daily, because here's the funny thing is, daily is really hard. We do daily, but we don't do a podcast as daily. It's funny. We can do this live as daily and put it on YouTube, and it doesn't bother people. When podcasts fill up in their space, they get overwhelmed and they stop subscribing. It's a really weird experience. So actually giving people a daily podcast, unless it's really short, is not a good idea, because so if it's a 1-hour podcast, they can't keep up with that every day. Most people can't. So you actually lose a lot of subscribers. And so what you want is if you do daily, it can't be longer than 15 minutes. And it's got to be like news and stuff like that. But a longer one, what we've a lot of times structured, like This Week in Photo, I don't know how Frederick does it now, but it was, 10 minutes of news, 20 minutes of a certain subject, and then we'd answer user questions. Try to find a way to bring the users in. And as we look at future podcasts, we're going to basically do a lot of that, but open it up to a live audience, or a live questions coming in through Mokana, so that we're really interacting with that audience, giving them a reason to watch it live, and then generating the podcast out of that conversation. Next question.
And it's from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. For new podcasts, when you're trying to develop the format and sound of the show, what are things to avoid?
Courtney?
Well, what I hate is people who violate the proximity area of the microphone and get way too close to it. And that gives me the creeps. Howard Stern is famous for that, getting right on top of that U-87 when he should be about 3 or 4 more inches away.
Also, I think he's now using a 103. I think he's using a TLM 103. Yeah,
okay.
Last time I saw him, I was like, that's a 103.
Oh, he's following you there, isn't he, Alex? All right.
He called me. He said, hey, what do I? He said, hey, what should I use here? And I said,
yeah, my U-87's about to die. So the other thing is avoid too many interruptions. People chiming in. If you have 4 people around a table and everyone wants to get their little kibitz in, it's become get everybody in the same studio if you can. During the pandemic, it may be difficult, but because of Zoom meetings, the latency and the fact that people kind of miss the visual cues, or they're delayed because of the latency, they can't tell when somebody else is about to say something, and they end up clashing and talking over each other. So develop some kind of visual system or some other system for a person will raise their finger right before they say something, so that they know the other person, so the other people in the room or the other people on the Zoom call know they're about to say something, so that you don't end up with constantly butting heads by people speaking at the same time.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I heartily agree with what Courtney just said. And in addition, people that make a podcast the way they think a podcast should be isn't necessarily somebody that did their homework, because if they start adding goofy music and sound effects and drop-ins, that's a no-go. That's a definite no-go.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, for the for the less experienced folks, if you see them not monitoring themselves, having side tone and making the kind of mistakes that Courtney just talked about, that's an obvious mistake when people just aren't aware of the sounds they're putting or not putting into their microphone.
Yeah, and often we do a lot of double ending, so we have everybody record locally. We still record their tracks remotely just in case, but we oftentimes have them record, and there's a lot of services that will do that as well. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, and the question is, the current Who Tour is using outboard gear, Summit DBX compressors, TC reverbs, along with a Digico SD7 console. Wouldn't that create both latency issues, ADDA, and degraded audio quality versus using a SoundGrid system or similar?
Go ahead, Nigel.
I have no idea the answer to this question, but I have a ticket for May the 3rd. So if I can hear anything on May the 4th, I'll tell you what it sounded like.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I mean, some systems that use plug-in cards, but nowadays, if you're using it especially with an SD7, the plugins are very low latency. It doesn't have to be on a SoundGrid system, but that's a good system to use if you trust it.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chris Taylor in Carlsbad, California. With the MixPre 3.2 and 6.2 in short supply, are any of the older sound devices line, like MixPre 2, 302D, adequate mic preamps?
Yeah, I used the USB Pre 2 for a long time, and it's a great. It's not as good as the ones that are in the new MixPres, because they have these what they call the cashmere preamps, which are incredibly quiet. It's like negative 128 noise floor or something. It's just really, really quiet. But I haven't seen so that they don't have those, but they're still good. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, unfortunately, I have a MixPre 3 version 1 right here, and the problem with the earlier versions, since you can't get the 2s, is that they don't accept a lot of the plugins. And they did just come out, by the way, yesterday with a new firmware update for all the MixPres, so you might want to download 7.11 or whatever it is, the latest version.
I'd be more likely to get a used MixPre 3.1 than I would the older models, because the preamps are dramatically better in the MixPres than they are in the older recording devices. Next question.
Darren Cirello from Dallas, Texas. Bill Maher has a new podcast which is filmed from the basement of his home. I watched his interview with William Shatner, and the video quality seemed very poor to me. Perhaps Office Hours has set the bar so high where everything else I view seems subpar.
And we'll just go, we'll do this in one more question, then we'll jump into the second hour. So for the folks managing the questions in the back, just push back any from other first hours that are already here. Next question. Go ahead, Courtney.
I watched that podcast, and it seems to be fairly unprofessionally produced. I think he's just got somebody there, turns on a camera, and then they just let it go. It's completely unstructured. There's no producer. He's completely drunk and out of control. And the guests are kind of in a tizzy wondering what to do because he's so far out of control. So it does seem subpar in its coverage. I think they have 3 cameras that they just turn on and roll. There's no camera operators. There's no one else there. And they just free roll for 2 hours.
I think that broadcasters have this kind of arrogance of that you can't do good work, or this is what the kids do. They make it all junky, but the kids know how to make it, like know how to squeeze a lot out of something that doesn't have a lot of quality. And broadcasters tend to just go, well, this is they just do really bad things, so we're just going to do really bad things. But they do bad things in a different way. So I think that's the problem is, and just lowering the overall quality just doesn't really work in that format. And so I think that's the real challenge. And we see that with broadcasts all the time when they're bringing people in over Zoom. It look horrible because they didn't do any prep. All right, next question. We're going to try to cut through this last one.
No problem. Next question comes to us from James Haldane in Vancouver, Canada. MixPre 3 is on back order still. I'm looking for something with high quality preamps and only need one XLR in. Any suggestions? 500 to 700 price range.
Go ahead, John.
At that price range, I would look probably in the Universal Audio, the Apollo product line.
Yeah, and I have to admit that I might look at, Universal Audio could possibly. I like things that are standalone. So if I'm in, Zoom might be another thing to look at, just because you have. I have to admit I don't like interfaces that are dependent on the computer anymore. Just because it's just been I've had a lot of problems. So I'd rather have it be just something that I can use as a recorder, and it kind of sits on its own, it runs on its own, and I plug it into the computer when I choose to. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the Zoom F series have the better preamps than the H series. So look at those. They're reasonably priced in that price range. You can get 4 or 6 input recorders that also work as USB interfaces, and they have a lot of the F6 has a lot of features like auto mix, and I don't think it has noise reduction yet, but it has timecode recording, etc. A lot of features that the higher end the higher end recorders have, and it's reasonably priced.
Yeah. All right, we're going to jump into. We're now changing subjects to our second hour, which is the talking about crafty. And what's funny is that I wasn't sure if there'd be any questions about crafty, but we've already started. So panelists, go ahead and raise your hand if you have any points that you want to make before we jump into the questions. But we've already got 9 of them ready to go. So, the reason we're talking about this, crafty is a short term for craft services, and craft services is feeding your crew, and it is something that is important. So, people keep, a lot of us have a way that we like to do it. A lot of us have a way we like the craft services to be available. And so it's something that, I realized after coming out of COVID, we've had a couple little things at our stage, and I realized I'm not very as prepared as I used to be. And so I'm working on that. And so I was thinking about it a lot over the last couple of weeks of like, I got to up my game back to what we used to do for craft services. I've just been buying people burritos. They're really good burritos, the best burritos in San Rafael as far as I'm concerned. But I got to get more. We just didn't have a lot of things there. So I started thinking about it a lot, and I was like, we should talk about this. This is something that's a good discussion. And I think that a lot of times people who have done a lot of production understand that feeding the crew is part of them feeling like they're important, and they're not being driven into the ground. Finding places to take breaks and do those kinds of things is important. A lot of times, even if people are coming in, the mistake is always to have people volunteer and then not feed them anything. Folks, you want to make sure that you go out and make sure that they get at least something. They walk away with something, they had a good meal out of it, that they're full, so that, again, burritos are good for that. But we're kind of, but the other thing is making sure that they have water and snacks and tea and coffee, and those types of things as well, if they're going to do an all day kind of event. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you really set the pace of your shoot. If you're a producer and you're providing craft services, I noticed a long time ago that when the TV crews came in to do TV commercials, it was always like vendor type food or pizza, something like that. But when the film crews came in, there was great craft services, and the crew was very, very buoyed up by it, because they would be talking amongst themselves. Hey, did you see what's on? They have a chef out there making up chicken francais or whatever the heck it is. But I think you make a statement real quick, and if you want the cooperation of your crew, and it always works better, good craft services will send the right message. And if you want to get them grumbling, put pizza out there, and that'll start the wrong thing.
Well, unless it's good pizza. I did crap. We got some pizza the other time, and it's really expensive pizza. Like I didn't expect it was going to be so expensive, and it was good. But if you get Caesar's, it's going to be more problematic. So anyway, one of the things that you also have to think about is what kind of food that you're putting out there. So, like for instance, I put out when I'm building a craft services table or when I'm making requests. I don't build them; I just request stuff. I am typically I don't put out a lot of sugar until the afternoon. So there's not a lot of M&Ms. There's not a lot of things because people will crash. And so usually you can tell in the 4 o'clock break, there's a thing of M&Ms because now I'm trying to get everybody to have a little bit more energy as they do the final hour or two, and then after that they can go to bed. But I'm trying to get a little bit more energy to everybody at that time. I also, I tend to lean not all protein, but I tend to lean more towards protein because it just kind of doesn't mess with people's sugar levels as much. So I tend to avoid, and also as someone on the crew, I tend to avoid things like pasta. Like I'll put it out, people request it, and sometimes we do it, and it's a very popular crafty thing to do. But I'll tend to avoid pasta because it definitely affects blood sugar. So that's so more towards proteins, more towards, especially for meals, greens and nuts and those types of things are things that are important. And again, a full supply of coffee. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, real quick. People don't realize the context of craft services is that most of these people are working a 10 or a 12-hour day. So you really have to be sensitive to their needs, energy level wise.
Yep, absolutely. Courtney.
And if you're on a summer day and it's hot out, salty foods. Don't overlook the salty foods. A lot of people put all this healthy stuff out that's, vegetable snacks, cut up vegetables and salt-free nuts and so on. And I'm constantly roaming the craft service to try and find something a little bit salty so that I don't get dehydrated and don't have my salt level go down to the point that you can suffer heat stroke. So that's important if you're in a hot situation.
Yeah. And then, and we have lots of discussions about it. I mean, it's definitely something that we talk about, and there's the general food, where you have, and people go crazy with it. And I admit that there's some folks in LA that will come out and they'll open up the whole thing, and it's just tons and tons and tons. And because it's easy, it is an enormous amount of packaged food. This is even before COVID, packaged food that is all like ho-hos and stuff like that. And there's just very little that you feel is healthy. And you can see a couple of us kind of foraging through there trying to find just some nuts. Like I just want some basic nuts. Now in COVID days, you also have to think about packaging. So it used to be you'd have a bowl of something sitting out, and nowadays it's much more of everything's in little packages that you can grab onto. So it's definitely something worth thinking. I will say before we get into the best craft services I've had was not recently, but in the last couple months but the best the one that I was the most impressed with was someone came and they were making like fajitas, but they were making the corn tortillas in front of us. Like it was like there was a person pressing them and a person putting them on, and then there was this great little bar that you could kind of put it together. And I took pictures. Like I was like, I'll see if I can show them to you. But I was like, okay, we need. I took a picture. I sent information to Shannon. I was like, we need to do this. We need to do this on one of our shows down in LA, and we did, and it was great.
I've been at that fajita bar many times on set. Yeah.
Have you?
They bring it in. Yeah, right.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
It's so good.
They'll bring it in for second meal, on a long shoot.
Exactly.
Because the crew is worn out, and they'll just make it available. Anybody can break away from the set can go out to order a fajita up.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. It was, but those are the things that people think about. And again, that a lot of it is, that's one of the things that has crewing is such a huge thing for a producer, and having people feel like it was a great place to work is a great way to, is a great way to get people back. You want to be on the top of their list, not at the bottom of their list, not as the last resort. Okay, let's jump into the questions. First question.
All right. First of all, I'm very hungry now. John Snyder from Reno, Nevada. How do you approach food differently when preparing for an outside event like the rocket launch, other than everything became a sandwich?
Go ahead, John.
So we spent a lot of time planning. We had 40, in between 40 or 50 volunteers. And every Friday we would have a team meeting. We'd have 20, 25 people at those meetings. We spent a lot of time planning the food. And then we had a big spreadsheet. One of the tabs on our spreadsheets was all related to food. If anybody had any food allergies, etc., and which each one of the meals were going to be. And then we Venmoed money over to Eric Price. Hats off to Eric Price and Robert, his son. They pulled it off. We had 5 a.m. call days. Early days. We ate like kings out there. Nigel will tell you. Water, coffee, and 2 squares, at least 2 squares, 2.5 per day. So it was well planned out. And the other interesting thing about having good craft services, it's like eating for a family. It's like that's part of the adventure,
right?
And brings the people together as a team. It's very important.
Yeah, we on some of the ones that we've done for a long period, like a 1 week thing, like what you were doing, or a 2 week thing, we oftentimes do bring in someone that's just going to cook food, and they're going to. In fact, what we've done in places, some of the places we go, you can't get hotel rooms. Like we get asked to do a show at a conference, let's say, or at a big convention, and all the hotel. By the time we were contracted for it, all the hotel rooms are gone, and so we'll rent a house. Now the temptation is to just get a bunch of stuff for the house. What we learned to do over time was to you hire someone and their job is just to take care of the house and the crew. So they're managing all of that. They're making sure everything's clean. They make sure that the food is made when everyone comes home. Like we tell them, hey, we're leaving here at 6. We expect to leave at 6, and 6:30 they've got everything laid out like a family thing. And again, I found it to be a great adventure, to have a whole bunch of people there. And it was, and then what we did is instead of trying to save money a lot of time, at first we tried to save money at it, and we learned to just spend into it and make it just really make great meals out of it, and really not try to save money as much as try to use the extra that the extra part that we had there to just make the meals as good as we could, and have that person there taking care of it. I found it to be much. Some people like it, some people don't. I found it to be much more relaxing. I don't really like going to restaurants, so it was great to not have to deal with lines and tables and things, and just be able to come sit down, and it meant that we all sat around, talked about the day, and figured stuff out, and then wandered off. Next question
from Lois Richter in Davis, California. At our local public access TV station, we just bring pizza for after a show. We are all volunteers, both host and crew. Can a potluck be considered crafty?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I guess it can. I mean, if you bring your own and serve it for everybody, it can be dangerous. And pizza doesn't age well. If they order it early and the show goes long before you get a chance to break for lunch, and that pizza is now just a soggy mess of oil that's room temperature, not a good choice.
You obviously haven't had couch pizza. like I feel like pizza lasts forever. Anyway, yeah, I think if you're all volunteers, pulling those together makes a lot of sense. The thing we try to do is mix it up a little bit. Try to have a couple different things if we're doing it regularly, but find something that we can all chip in. And you can do potluck. Again, I would be more likely to have a group just order something from a different restaurant and all chip in and get it delivered there. Next question.
And it's from Nigel Desau from Austin, Texas. What is the correct protocol for the client? Should they use the craft services table?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Of course. I mean, the client is the one ultimately that pays for it, and you must pay homage to the client. The only problem I have with clients getting involved in the craft services is they always bring alcohol, and it's just not the thing you want on a shoot.
Go ahead, Kenneth. Oh, he's not here. Yeah. I think that typically our clients like to eat, with the rest of the crew. I mean, most of our clients like to feel like they're part of the crew, so they eat there. A lot of times we ask them if they want that. And with clients, I'll deliver whatever they want, wherever they want to do it. You want to sit? You want to have your own room? Do you want us to order something special? Like that's usually how we kind of treat clients. But a lot of them like to just get in the line and be part of what everybody else is doing. And we find that a lot with talent as well, although we tend to have the talent eat first. So there's different ways of handling that. In some nomenclatures, it's the crew eats first and then the talent. And sometimes the talent eats separate. With a lot of ours, we just make sure that they get what they want before we jump into the rest of it. Next question.
John Snyder from Reno, Nevada. What is your favorite food that nobody thinks will be popular but gets eaten first?
Mitchell?
Veggies. Like carrot sticks and celery sticks, things like that. Just people usually grab those things fast.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't think that question, if nobody thinks is nobody thinks is good, then it's not going to be eaten first. So
yeah, I mean, the things that I find go really fast, at least for me, especially on one of those big ones that's opened with a lot of prepackaged stuff, is jerky and nuts go really fast. Like you get there early because it's just like there's a whole lot of the crew that just there's not that many of them, and there's a whole lot of crews that do craft services a lot get sensitive to certain things. Like the early folks will get bagels, but after a while people stop eating the bagels because they're not that good. They're not high quality bagels, and they just fill you up. So in a bad way. And so people start that way, but people who do this a lot, I feel like they lean, especially in the mornings, more towards some of the stuff that has less sugar in it. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like getting oohs and ahs. Like for us, it used to be bringing Tasty Cake out somewhere out Midwest or out on the West Coast, and they would see Tasty Cake and they go, ooh.
The one I love to put out when we were doing a lot of this, one of the things I love to do is to put out biltong. Biltong is like basically South African jerky, but it tastes way better than U.S. jerky. And so people would take a bite of that and be like, what is this? And so trying to have like cool things that are from other parts of the world that might be slick, that aren't going to make people feel uncomfortable later, is stuff that we like to add there. I do anytime, again, we'll get back to this. Anytime you can have somebody there cooking something for folks. I mean, we've definitely worked on craft situations where you get there at breakfast and there's someone making you omelets, and that's, taking it to a whole nother level. But having somebody making something to your order, and then usually you still want some kind of line, because some people just don't want to talk to anybody in the morning and they just want to get their stuff. They just want some scrambled eggs and move on. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Fried okay for mid-work meal, or are you always looking for clean eats?
I really I'm super sensitive to fried foods, and so I try not to serve fried foods ever. Like, in a meal, but if I do it, it'll be the last meal. Like I won't put fried foods into anything that isn't the last meal that people go out with, and I won't eat it in production. Next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington. Is pizza a real food for production?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Not if you're on a low-carb diet. Yeah, it's a problem for some people. You have to order a variety, and in many productions and maybe some unions can't even consider it a hot meal, because there are union contracts that require a hot meal. And sometimes pizza is not considered a hot meal. So you have to look at the fine lines on the contract to see what's acceptable as real food or a real meal and what is not. Usually pizza is just a walk-away meal, or it's something that's provided for convenience or for the crew to partake of or not after, but it's not part of a regular meal break.
Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Have you ever been on a shoot where someone eats the wrong thing and you lose product for the shoot?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't. I was on one shoot, and we were the setup was a block party, and so there was a big table in the middle of the street with full of cakes and cookies and stuff, and the union rep showed up on the set, who hadn't been there all day, and then started grazing across that big table of props. The prop man had to come up and tell him, those have all been sprayed with insecticide to keep flies off of them. And the business agent kind of sheepishly went away and started spitting out all the food that he went. And another problem we had is I used to do Butterball turkey commercials. And the problem is, to make those turkeys look good, they undercook them to the point of them being poisonous, deadly. If you don't cook them thoroughly, they are very dangerous. And they would always, at the end of the shoot, they have a special locked dumpster that they throw all the turkeys in to keep the homeless people looking at those beautiful brown turkeys and digging into them, which would probably quickly cause them food poisoning.
Oof. Mitchell.
I've done a ton of infomercials for cooking products or cooking utensils. And yes, to answer your question, Chris, it has happened. For example, like we'll cook something, go through the whole process of showing how fast we can cook a full turkey, for example, and then the crew is invited to come up and taste the food, and then we're all chomping away on the stuff, and then somebody says, Wait a minute, we need to get some B-roll of the, and then boom, you're stuck because now you got to go recook everything. So, yeah, it happens. You got to plan. Be prepared.
Other than the cooking shows that I've done, which you can actually oftentimes eat the food, for any of the other shoots that we've done, the food is generally not in a state that can be eaten. Like if you bit into it, you would know, like, because it's, like the things are made out of glue and we've sprayed things on them and everything else. It would not be a happy experience to pick up the wrong food to do that. But for the cooking shows, that was one of our best shoots ever. Was we did a thing on how to cook a roast with Thomas Keller, and he then insisted that we all had some of it, and it's really good. Just in case you wondered, it's really good. Next question.
Luckily, you didn't need any B-roll. This is from Craig McFarlane from Boston. What is the origin of the term craft services? Was it an abbreviation for food craft?
I don't know. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it was services for the craftspeople working on the shoot, the people that are the people that craft the product.
Right.
They're craftsmen, and so their services are provided for, including their meals.
Next question.
And this question is from Matt Halverson in Brookings, South Dakota. How do you voice concerns when food is cold and or completely gone and doesn't get restocked? I feel bad complaining about free food.
It's a tricky business. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, there's chain of command, and you must follow it. And I think most seasoned professionals that work in a crew, they know who to talk to. They don't just start grumbling and yelling at the clients. They go to their boss or their superior.
Yeah, I will say, as a producer, I do everything I can to not have that happen, to not run out of food, to make that happen. As a person on set, I will never complain about food, ever. Like I will, like union folks do, but as a non-union person that's working on there, that's there, I will never say anything about the food ever to on set. Like, we might grumble about it later. I always have enough food in my little backpack to survive the whole day. Like, literally, I have nuts and bars and things, and if I don't get fed, I'll survive. Now, I may be prickly about doing it again, later, or I might want to, whatever. I'll be prepared for it. But the thing you always have to remember when you complain about things on set is that, if you're non-union, is that, producers make choices about who they, you're not working for them. You're not on salary. They can just choose not to hire you the next time. And so people who complain about things like food oftentimes just don't get called back. So that's something you always keep in the back of your head, is that, unless you're really good at what you do, you should be very careful about complaining about almost anything on set. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex just said what I was going to say. Even on a union shoot, because on a union shoot, you're the days of union shop. In other words, you're a full-time employee of a studio. Those days are long gone. You're hired on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, and if you complain to the producer about the food, you probably will not be invited back on the next project. Yeah. And there's no, you cannot file a grievance. Well, you could file a grievance, but that would mean you will never work with that company again.
Yeah, you have to remember in production that it is a very political process, and it's a very tricky process there. So it's difficult. So you have to be you just have to be very careful about complaining. There's certain things that we do here that is useful, like don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't swear, and don't complain. Generally, those are big things on sets that you don't want to do very often, because it's almost never, because it's just everyone's going to make a choice. And if you're really, really good, you can be prickly, but you got to stay really good. Staying on the top of that hill is pretty difficult. Mitchell?
Yeah, I hope people are paying attention to what's being said here, because there's some very wise people with experience suggesting things that are no-goes if you're working in a crew. And if you're a first-timer, just keep your mouth shut, do your thing, don't complain like Alex says. When you're standing in line with other people looking at food, it's very tempting sometimes to comment or make, I've done it, comments that might be negative. All of that reflects upon your professionalism and the producer you're working for.
Yeah, so it's just and this is the stuff that no one tells anybody. Like I think oftentimes people just kind of understood, but you have to be very careful about that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, what experiences have you had with local health departments or with other food service regulators on site?
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
You don't normally run into them. They will rate a food truck if you have a food truck on your production. And there have been instances where caterers have turned up and an entire crew has come down with food poisoning, and that is deadly if you're on a multi-day shoot, because it can wipe out your production if the caterer just didn't keep the fish at the right temperature for the right period of time and served it up, or the chicken wasn't completely cooked. It can take out a whole crew. And usually, since they're kind of the vagabonds of the restaurant industry, the local health departments have to have grievances filed or a complaints filed against a particular operator, and then they will come out and inspect the truck, and they do have to have health department certificates in order to operate in Los Angeles.
Next question.
Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas. What do you like to budget per person per day?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's a very interesting question because it brings up the issue of per diems, and you don't want to do per diems or offer money to people in lieu of food, because now you've lost control of them. They go out somewhere, they go to the local bar, the local club, the local Chili's, whatever. Money-wise, between $100 and $150 a day would be a per diem, and maybe that would translate also into how much you're going to spend on the food.
Depends on how many meals that you're doing for them. So on a one meal thing, I tend to, because there's snacks and there's coffee and there's things and there's meals and everything else, I'll tend to be in the kind of the $40, $50 range per person. And if I start doing more meals, that starts going up. Maybe not linearly, but definitely goes up from there. Next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington. Food trucks have become popular for on-set catering. Any thoughts about what types of food are better than others for a crew?
Courtney.
Well, generally for the crew meal, there may be a food truck there that the caterer uses to prepare the meal, but almost always a catered meal will have multiple entrees, so that they'll have chicken and fish and maybe a beef product that you can choose from. You can choose your entree and 2 or 3 different sides that you can choose from, so that you can kind of make up your own plate. And they have vegan choices for those that are non-meat eaters. So you have to take all of those dietary considerations into account. And but sometimes what will happen is a certain type of food truck will show up. I've seen, a taco truck will show up, or a sandwich truck that has grilled cheese sandwiches. There's a grilled cheese sandwich truck that makes killer grilled cheese. And what happens is the actors, the above-the-line talent on a show, on a TV show, let's say, the actors toward the end of the season, they will pay for the truck to come in the afternoon, so it won't be a regular meal break, but you'll get an announcement on the set that, hey, the taco truck is here, thanks to, the star of the show, and they've financed and they paid for that taco truck. It buys them a little goodwill from the crew, and it keeps morale up.
Yeah, a lot of the crews I've worked on recently, they bring in 2 or 3 different trucks, that are just some of the local ones, and I guess they manage the charging from there. And it's really nice. It's really kind of a fun, festive experience to do that. Next question.
From Sky Gleason in Seattle, what are the union rules about meals?
Courtney.
Well, they've all changed, I tell you. Under COVID, it's gotten really nasty. Union rules normally is there has to be a hot meal. You have to have a meal break every 6 hours, and you have to break for at least a half hour and no more than an hour. You have to break. You have to go back. I think it's an hour after the last person through the line if it's an hour-long break. So each person has to have an hour break. And if half of that hour is spent waiting in line to get your food, that's a problem. So it can take up to an hour and a half to feed a crew. So you have to take that into account when you're scheduling a union crew to get the number of people you have, and you may have to have two food trucks. And a lot of times the extras and the actors are fed off of a separate truck. Usually background actors are fed more inferior food, more ready-to-serve food, and less prepared food. Those are the basic normal union rules. However, under COVID, all rules changed, and we no longer served. They would have hot tables with hot trays of various different entrees, chicken, fish, beef, whatever, and you'd serve it up. You'd go down the line and pick whatever you wanted. Well, that is all gone out the window. They're now either having to do boxed lunches with COVID because there can be no communal utensils, or you have to go to a truck and order it up, and they put it on a plate for you and they hand it to you, and nobody touches that plate except the gloved server. So, and you have to eat. You can no longer eat at the same table. You have to eat apart. They have to stagger. They have to stagger meal breaks, which is difficult when you're trying to shoot, and everybody has to be involved in this particular shot. They can only break away people that aren't involved in that shot to eat ahead of time. They have to be 6 feet apart, so you have to have a bunch of little tables set out, and they have to be in the shade, and they have to, there's all these regulations when considering feeding your crew that has to be outside now because of COVID restrictions. And craft service has also changed completely. It used to be you could go up, like I said, and you'd have little bowls of nuts and M&Ms and anything you could pick and choose from and serve up yourself. Well, no longer is the case. You go to a window and you say, give me a package of the Nutter Butters and a package of the cashews and make me a coffee, and I'll have this cream and this sugar in it, and you don't graze or grab anything by yourself. There's nothing that more than one person can touch, and it's handed to you under COVID. And I don't know how long that's under the return to work conditions, right, which is a separate contract that the unions negotiated with the producers concerning safety and return to work under COVID, and has very strict restrictions on anything that has to be touched or, the things that have to be worn for protection on the set from spreading the disease to keep everybody healthy. So it's a different world out there right now, and hopefully it will change back to the old way soon.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, in addition to what Courtney just said, the other thing that's changed a lot is when you break the crews, if they're union crews. There's been some unfortunate accidents that have happened due to sleep deprivation or people being tired or just not thinking well. And food and breaking seem to come hand in hand. If you're a producer or director and you know when to break the crew, you can make or break your budget for the whole day. So paying attention to breaking rules is very critical to this.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there's something else that is allowed under unions called French hours. And if you're ever offered French hours, be careful about that, depending upon the job that you do. And French hours means they don't have meal breaks at all. You can go 12 hours without a meal break. They have food available on the set the entire time.
Right.
And if you get a break, you can go get you can prepare yourself a hot plate and eat it if you have time. But if you're somebody like a sound mixer or somebody, a one-person crew, you cannot necessarily break yourself for enough time to go, fix a plate, sit down and eat it, because they're going to be shooting. And you should be there if you're the sound mixer or the camera operator or the first assistant, director. So that becomes problematic, but it is allowed under union contracts, something called French hours.
Yeah, and you have to be careful. The union rules are different. Also, if you know them in one place, they're not necessarily the same in another. So, for instance, Courtney talked about meal breaks every 6 hours. With Local 16 up here, it's every 3 to 5 hours. So no less than 3, no more than 5. For at least the shoots that we do for venues and so on and so forth. And then there's different rules. There's film rules. There's event rules. There's streaming rules. There's all these other things. So it's 3 to 5 hours up here. And we pay a lot of attention to those. And then you have, if you're going to feed the crew, it's 30 minutes, but they have to have 30 minutes from the time they get to their food as well. So a lot of times you're breaking at 45. You have a 45-minute break for a 30-minute. You can't just fit it into 30 minutes. And then a lot of times what we do is we think best of both worlds. We give a 1 hour walk away, but we also provide food. So 1 hour walk away means that we're going to give you a 1 hour break. You have to go fend for yourself for the food, and that's acceptable up here at least. So you can do that. But what we do is then have food so they don't have to leave. And usually our union members prefer that, to have both of those things at the same time. Next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington. Is the porta potty and a trash a responsibility of catering?
I think that only the trash connected to the food. Like I think that's the only place we've seen it is like they'll clean up their own oftentimes the trash that's generated by the catering, but definitely not the porta potty. And we don't want them to deal with the porta potty like that. We don't want the catering people to deal with the porta potty. Go ahead, Courtney.
Craft service is responsible for cleanup on the set. If somebody drops something or breaks something, even if it's a prop or a, sweeping the set, and getting cleaning up after people that leave water bottles around, etc. That is the responsibility of the craft service department. So, but not the caterer usually.
Next question.
J.J. McKenna from San Rafael, California. Cleanup. Are there some foods that should be avoided as single-serving foods that would ruin the set, either immediately or 4 hours later?
Fish. On a hot day, chocolate. I've seen chocolate on handles and things like that. If someone's eating them, that's why M&Ms were created, was not to leave. It wasn't cameras that they were trying not to leave chocolate on, but M&Ms were created to encapsulate chocolate into something that wouldn't get all over the machinery. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, greasy food should be avoided. Turkey should be avoided because of the tryptophan. It puts everybody to sleep in the afternoon for the midday meal. Right. They will usually try and avoid turkey.
Yeah. Next question.
And a question comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. Have I missed something, or is craft services all about eating foods on set?
That's exactly what it is. Well, it's food near the set. Yeah, absolutely. You didn't miss anything. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it does involve a few other things other than eating, which they put the trash cans out for managing trash and cleanup on the set, as I said earlier. So it's that and the food.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. What is the threshold for the decision to provide food services on a production? What factors necessitate the escalation of what is provided? Is there ever a good reason to withhold this service?
If we have a short shoot, we might not provide very much craft services. We might provide some snacks and so on and so forth. I will admit, I'm just getting back into shooting after 2 years of a hiatus, so we've been a little off on what we've been doing. But generally, I try to have something for everybody to eat. If it's 4 hours or more, and even if it's 3 hours or more, I try to figure out something that there's going to be at least some snacks and some food and everything else that's there. And again, we're getting our sea legs back to doing that. But generally, we like to keep people fed. As far as escalating it, it just depends on who's there. You always want to do the best you can within the budget that you have. It's really one of the least expensive ways to make everybody happy in a production. Next question.
It's from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, asking, have you seen delivery services like Uber Eats, and Grubhub touch location craft services?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Usually no, because you can't depend on delivery happening at the right time, and you're fairly strict on when to take your meal breaks. You may want to have a meal before you change locations and so on. So they will usually have just a PA go out and order and pick up food rather than depend on a third-party service.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Agree 100%.
We've definitely done some delivery, and to the point it's been a disaster. So we generally send someone out to go get it. And the hardest part is you order something from a restaurant and then you go there and they don't have it yet. So and you're ordering like 16 of them. So you're a big piece of the like there's this huge pipeline that they're trying to get out, and suddenly you ordered it. So the other thing you have to think about is you want to organize those orders if you can the day before, so that the restaurant knows that they're coming. And that's something that we learned over time. Next question.
From Josh Hogwout in Memphis, as the client who hires AV vendors for corporate shows, is it acceptable to provide the crew with the same meal provided for the audience, or should it be a different meal?
I don't think there's any issue necessarily. I mean, usually the audience gets better food than the crew does. I mean, in a lot of the ones that I've been to. So, I usually wouldn't complain too much. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Usually the audience is eating, especially if it's a banquet show, they're eating much better food than they provide to the crew. So that's the only reason it would be different. I would never complain if they're feeding me the same food that the audience is getting.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I don't like to commingle the crew with the audience because problems occur.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I used to work a lot of weddings. I was a wedding DJ 30 years ago, and that was always the nice thing. Is I over the weekend I always felt like I ate really well because I was I just get in line and I was all dressed up, so I just get in line and wander through and get some food and wander off. And so and that was encouraged. I mean, it wasn't or someone would bring me a plate of something to there. So I think that it's generally okay. And when we work on large conferences, a lot of times they have boxed lunches for everybody there, and we just grab one of those and work our way through it. It's usually pretty good. Next question.
I'm sorry, I still have a memory of young Alex in a blue tuxedo. Sorry.
It was not blue. It was black, but I did have a purple paisley vest, which was quite nice, and I cannot get anywhere close to fitting into it now.
Sorry, we're going on topic. Rupert McRae is here to ask a question. Rupert's from Dallas. What gourmet or artisan methods have you seen prepared on set?
Go ahead, Courtney.
All kinds, especially on commercial shoots where they tend to have big budgets. You're spending $1 million to $750,000 to $1 million on one day shoot. They will have name brand chefs show up with a food truck to prepare artisanal type of plates on china that you're given, and with very tastefully applied sauces and so on. We've gotten some incredible gourmet food available. Lobster, you'll find lobster occasionally, or steak that is a Chateaubriand cooked to your liking. They'll have a charcoal grill right there cooking the steaks for you up to you order up your steak, and they have one that's partially done, and then we'll finish it to your liking. So yeah, I've seen a lot of gourmet food prepared on the set.
Next question. Oh, can't hear you, Mitchell.
Pardon. Alex, you mentioned the unspoken social conventions that are at play. With people on the autism spectrum, those unspoken conventions are not obvious. What would you think of a second hour about working with and mentoring those on the spectrum?
Yeah, I don't know if we'd be able to do a whole second hour on it, but I'm happy to answer questions in that area. It's just mostly that we don't have that many people in our group that are on the spectrum, or that know they're on the spectrum. They might be. I think that the big thing that, when in doubt, the big thing is, when in doubt, not to say very much. This is how I approach a lot of things. when in doubt, when I don't know what to do, I don't say very much. I just sit there and just let it flow through, and just try to meander as quietly as I can through a process until I figure out what it looks like. That's not necessarily something for someone on the spectrum or not on the spectrum. It's just a general process that I have of, if you put me in a meeting with a bunch of people I don't know, I'll barely say anything until I understand what the rules of engagement are and who they are, and I'm constantly trying to figure that out. But if you can't get to that, I generally am very quiet. I know that you'd never think that based on the show, but generally I tend to be very quiet when I don't understand it, or I don't understand what the processes are. Next question.
From Brody Hefner in New York City, I see that restaurant menus now offer more options to accommodate customers with restricted diets, food allergies, gluten intolerances, etc. Are craft services providers also trending in this direction?
Go ahead, Courtney.
They will usually have some things for the gluten-free crowd out there, or for the vegans. They will prepare additional dishes for vegan people, but usually it's the other way around. There's you'll have lots of bacon and comfort food, as we call it, on the set, and that always goes over really well. But they do accommodate the people with food allergies and so on if they can.
And I have a lot of sensitivities to food. I wouldn't call them allergies, but I definitely know what I like to eat and what I don't like to eat, or what I can eat and what I can't eat, and still keep working. And as a producer, we try to ask everybody what their food allergies are, what their preferences are. Are they vegan? Are they whatever? And we try to figure out a way to solve that problem for them. As a crew member, I will pick whatever I get and just pick out what I need, what I need to eat. And if I can't find that, I have a backpack with enough food to get through the day. Again, you just get, I avoid personally trying to be anything that would ever get me a label of being high maintenance. As a crew member, as a producer, you definitely want to ask, because you want to be someone who's taking care of everybody and asking them, oh, they're vegetarian. Like we had a band member for something on the stage, and he just happened to say, oh, I like this specific thing. And then I made sure to, that we have just this thing for him, and we're very careful about it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, for crews at larger events, could the same touchless ordering technology be used as for customers in large venues?
Well, there's not really an ordering technology for cruise. Generally, there's a kind of a banquet style thing that you kind of go past and order it, and someone's scooping stuff onto what you need. So yeah, go to Courtney.
On small crews, like for a corporate shoot or something, they will come around with a iPad dialed into the a menu system of a local restaurant, and you can order off of that menu, and they will either write it down or they will add it to the order and put your name by it, and they will then send somebody to go pick it up for lunch.
What's cool is I think it's Chipotle's for smaller crews. Chipotle's, I think you can send them you can send everybody an invite to go into an order. So everyone just gets an email and they just tap on it, but it keeps it under your credit card, and they can all order what they want. And then you hit go, and they make it and tell you when it's going to be there, and you get there. And it's really useful for a smaller crew, as Courtney said. That works really well, is to be able to send someone an invite to do that. But I haven't seen it as a general purpose thing, but I've definitely seen it with Chipotle's because it's right near one of the companies that we were working with. Next question.
Cool. I like that one. This is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Crew allergies are always a concern when you're providing food. Do you generally have a dedicated person to manage concerns, or do you contract that out?
We usually have, it's if on a larger crew. I mean, in a smaller crew, it's the producer. On a larger crew, it's a coordinator that is managing craft services, usually among a couple other things. It's not dedicated to it, but they definitely are asking people we have a questionnaire for people to find out if they have any allergies. Next question.
Christian Ortiz in South Florida. How far will you go for people with special diets like no gluten or food allergies?
In general, we will do it. If we've hired them, we want to make sure that we're not giving them something they can't eat. So as a producer, again, we definitely try to find a way to serve everybody things that they need. Again, as an individual person that's working on the crew, I'll never ask for anything. I just go. When people say, "What do you have any restrictions?" I said, as long as it's food. Usually, or what do you want? I'll say food. Like food is good, and that's all I say if someone asks me about it. Again, that's as the person working there, as the producer, I always want to know what people want and try to do the best we can to take care of them. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, and if you're securing a craft services company, to make sure they properly label the food and allergies. So, like this food contains peanuts or it's gluten free or whatever. It's kind of up to them to do that, and it's up to you to make sure they do that.
And in common things that have high allergy rates, like peanuts, you almost never see on a set. Like they just, most of the time, I mean, like in the opened area, you might see bags of them, but rarely do you see things that are these days. Rarely do you see those things kind of out in the open. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, peanut allergies are a problem, probably overblown problem for adults, but for children, definitely an issue. What we do on long form television, if you're on a sitcom or a TV series where it's you're on production for a large number of months, your start package, which you fill out for the union when you start a production, which has all of your information, will have an area on there for any food allergies, any special considerations for your diet that they have to take into account, and they process all those start packages so that they make sure that they have enough specialized food for anyone who has any special dietary issues.
Next question.
And it's from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. What are your rules for keeping food and drink away from equipment?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's just an unwritten rule. I think any crew person would know to keep their soda away from the console. But
you'd think so.
You don't do it. I was going to say you tell them they know better, but they do it anyhow. And then you're out there with a console that's smoked because they dumped a soda into it. So making a sign, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
You do want to keep it away from the equipment, but another consideration if you're shooting on location, if you're in someone's house or even in a venue somewhere, almost always there's no food or drink allowed inside the venue. Once you enter the door, you're not allowed to bring food in other than bottled water with a cap on it. And that's the only food that's allowed inside the building. And if you want to graze the craft service table, you have to allow enough time to go out there and choose your food and eat it outside before you come in. And there's usually a big trash can by the door where you throw any discarded food before you enter.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back. Alex, you said unless you're really good, be careful about complaining. If you have a documented issue with the food, here's a Oh, sensitivities, diabetes, etc. Is it appropriate to speak up to in a calm, professional way?
It's always appropriate to have that. It's just that as soon as you show up as someone who's making it more difficult, again, you're in a market where there's a lot of people. This is what no one tells anybody. Like, is that producers just going to make decisions like, oh, that's just one extra thing I have to think about. And so again, what I do is I bring enough food on my own that I can survive the day without needing anything else. And I'm totally self-contained, and I'm really happy to have the food. And I love it when they provide it. And if they don't, I'm not going to say anything. I may not be available the next time they call, to work on it because I go or whatever. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to say anything ever. Like it's and that again, as a producer, I want to know what your sensitivities are. I want to make sure that you're getting what you need. I want to be known for that process. But as a person working on the set, I will never bring it up personally. No, I'm not saying that's the way everyone should do it, but I'm just saying that is the way that I approach it, because I just, if I'm there, I'm happy to be there. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. If you have special sensitivities, glucose, problems, diabetes, etc., I've seen most diabetics on the set always provide for themselves. They'll have a candy bar. They'll have food on them that can, they can meter out and use when they need it, because they don't want to depend on the production if it's going to affect their work and so on, unless they make arrangements in advance with the production, days before the shoot happens, and let them know you have this sensitivity, but then your chances of being hired again get smaller and smaller.
Yeah. And again, if you're really, really good and you're providing that only service, I mean, a lot of people, we have people that we hire definitely, and they have lots of details that need to be sorted out, and food being one of them. But the ones that we hire all day, every day are the ones that are just the least amount of trouble, because you're just you got 1,000 things you're worried about. And, trying to have everybody have exactly what they wanted gets hard. If everyone starts to want, this person doesn't want pickles, and this person doesn't want avocado, and this person doesn't want, and that's also when you think about craft services, that's why a lot of craft services just have a lot of options. So, I've gone to some craft services that are, 40 feet long, and it's lots of different options, and you can decide what you can and can't eat. And it's all in one long line. Like, you just pick the things that you can eat and leave the other things out. Next question.
J.J. McKenna from San Rafael, California. Some local farmers markets often have food trucks that represent a local restaurant. Are there base costs to requesting a food truck on a larger set?
Yeah, there's usually a guarantee. So you're going to say that there's a minimum that we're going to pay you to be here. And then usually they're itemizing it. So they bring it up, as they order it. But we usually don't have to, the handful of times that I've gotten them personally, usually I'm at one that has it. But when I've gotten them personally, we're just saying, if you show up here, we're going to pay you a minimum of $300 or whatever that is. And then you're just going to rack it up. And if it doesn't go over that, we'll still pay it. But if it does, and usually, the number is not, if you're bringing a food truck in, the crew is large enough that you're not going to miss the minimum. So for that process. Next question.
From Deborah Woodfork from Washington, D.C. How do you manage food waste?
Courtney.
Well, it depends. If it's food waste that won't age well, if it's something that was cooked and it's leftover, we usually donate it to a homeless shelter nearby. Of course, you can't do that after a day or two. So, and if it's packaged food, usually they'll, that has, a shelf life of several months, they'll keep it for the next production and bring it out and keep it in the craft service bins. Food waste, like I mentioned earlier, on a food shoot, where this is particularly where food waste you have to be careful of, because a lot of times the food is treated for its appearance on camera. And so you don't necessarily want to give that unless nothing is being done to it, adulterating it to donate it. Usually it has to be kept under a locked disposal method so that the homeless don't get into it and eat something that could be detrimental to their health.
Yeah, it's changed a lot because of COVID, and even before that, it was starting to tighten up for a long time. When a lot of craft services ended up just being given to the crew at the end of the day, like who wants to grab a box of this or a box of that, and so it was. I know that when I was when I was DJing weddings long ago, that was one of the big benefits is that you'd finish at the end of the day and there'd just be a whole bunch of food. I'd bring it home for the whole house. I was, renting a room.
You took home a lot of pizza, I think, that couch pizza, I think.
I did not. The funny thing is that you go to weddings and there's no pizza. It's all nice. It's all good stuff. And it was I just bring back trays of it and put it. I had 4 roommates at the time, and you put trays of it in the. I was the best roommate because I would just throw stuff in there. I was like, I can't eat it. Just please eat it all. And then I worked at a barbecue restaurant. And at the end of the day, they have to give everything away. And so it was because they can't use it the next day. And so it was like I just brought trays of brisket and chicken and everything else back. Let's go to the next question.
Not before I ask you if you need a roommate, but anyhow,
I don't do those anymore. But yeah,
okay.
That was 30 years ago.
I like going back. The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York has a question. Have you ever given separate gift bags to set cast client after an event as a thank you, or is it ethically taboo?
It is fine as long as the person that you're giving to is not a politician. You have to be careful. You have to we remind people, don't give politicians anything ever. Like, it's a just the appearance of it can be problematic, and so that's the one place we don't do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
And there are union rules about receiving gifts from producers, or even having relatives that received gifts from producers. You have to sign disclosure statements that disclose any relatives you have that may have gotten you this job through favoritism. So you have to be careful about that on a union shoot.
And the last question.
Very last question from Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. In the before time and the long, long ago, I was a roadie for a country band when I was first starting out. When the band found out I could cook, I was the grill guy for as long as I was with them. Is double duty on crews that common?
It's very uncommon to do more than one thing like crafty is generally a person or a group or a service. It's usually not unless you have some, and even in a crew that is mixed, usually you decide that person, that's what they're going to do. They're not going to necessarily be hauling things and then cooking, because for a larger crew, the other thing is that it's an all day thing. Like your lunch starts 3 hours before to get it ready if you're doing it well. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, exactly right. There aren't very many jobs on the set that could overlap. That don't overlap to the point that you'd be neglecting one job for the other. I occasionally would do teleprompting and sound, which is very difficult to do, and I only did it once or twice. Or I've done sound and video playback or the computer wrangler on all the Apple commercials for years. But usually all the stuff that is close-ups of the computer didn't have anybody in it, so it did overlap, and I would do both jobs, and I would get paid 2 paychecks for doing 2 crew positions.
Hey, Mitchell.
Yeah, in the old days, double duty for me was I was well known for my barbecue at the break party. After everybody was excused, they were welcome to come over and have some barbecue and some suds. But that's the closest I ever came to doing any double duty.
Yeah, and those kinds of crew, the party at the end, pay attention to it. It's good. Makes everybody feel happy. Makes everyone, no matter how hard the production was, if you have like a little soiree or a barbecue, even on set, but you have something that's really nice at the end of a shoot, it helps push all the feathers back down again. So, all right. No, it was fun. See, I bet you when we started this hour, you didn't think that A, we'd be able to talk about Crafty for an hour. Or B, that we'd have so many questions. We didn't hit the record today, but we're pretty close. Like a number of questions we answered.
Gaff tape. Talk about an hour.
I know, exactly. Now we got to figure out something even more obscure to talk about. We can talk about chairs. I could talk about chairs for an hour. We're not going to, but I'm just saying I could talk about chairs on production for an hour, easy. All right. Thanks everybody, and thanks to our producers for all the great questions driving this conversation forward, and thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And now we're going to jump into After Hours. That takes so long to get to the black.
Yes, we could do the second hour on parking.
I'm so hungry. We talked about food for an hour.
I am really hungry. I'm sorry, guys.
Mitch, you have to learn how to properly whisper.
Oh, did you just call me Mitchie?
No, I said Mitch. You have to. You have too much volume in your whisper. All right, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.